And again, welcome everybody to Hoosier Type Company, analog letterpress in the digital world. We are just getting set up here. We've got Daniel Swartz here with us. He's going to talk through his letterpress process. I personally am really excited to hear this talk. I've been looking forward to it for a while, and I've gotten to know Daniel a little bit over the past couple months. So you guys are in for a treat. Hey, Daniel.
Hello.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. I'm doing great. We've got quite a few people on here. So I just want to remind everyone the chat is open and the question and answer is open. So I'll make sure to keep an eye on that for you, Daniel. And then towards the
Thank
end,
you.
go ahead and run through some of those. But I'll go ahead and let you kick it off.
All right. Um, let's get going. Hi, everybody. So first of all, my name's Daniel. I'm going to share my screen here because I've got a bunch of slides. All right. Can you guys see that okay? Oh, my goodness. All right. All right. Tori, is that okay?
Yep, we can see it.
Okay. All right. So here we go. I'm going to be talking about my analog letterpress design and some of the digital processes that I use. So I call my studio Hoosier Type Company, and I operate in rural Indiana, northeast of Indianapolis. This is my little space here where I make things, spend my days. So here we go. So I think a little bit of context might be useful. I got started in 2020. At the very tail end of 2019, I found out that my position was being reduced, and I had missed the first round of layoffs with the group that I worked for, but I didn't miss the second round. And that unfortunately put me in a job hunt right in the midst of 2020, which, if you remember, was not an optimal time to be doing many things. So I had a lot of time on my hands and a lot of angst to kind of work out. And so, kind of on a whim, I decided to start carving these giant letters out of linoleum, and I hand inked these things. And in my basement at the time, I printed these giant "Make Something Great" prints. You can see what size they are. I mean, I'm not a very big guy, so maybe it looks a little bigger, but there they are. And I didn't know what I was doing at all. I'd done some block printing beforehand, and I had kind of a passing interest in letterpress over time. And I decided to I put them up on Instagram, and surprisingly, they sold. And it was like the most encouraging thing. Kind of as I was leaving one career, I was trying to figure out what I was going to do next. And I eventually moved back to the farmland that I grew up on. And this is my tiny little studio that I'm sitting in right now, where I make things happen day in and day out. So I make a wide variety of things. I'm going to show you guys some of my prints so you have an idea of the kind of work that I'm making. And then I'm going to spend the rest of the time talking about my process and how I make these. So I love being from Indiana. I love operating out here. So I do some local kind of pride things. I love being a Midwest maker as well, because I think sometimes those of us who are making in the middle get maybe not as much excitement as people that are making on the coasts. And I think there's great things happening in the middle. I think there's great things happening in small spaces and some of the more humble areas. So I like to celebrate that kind of thing. This is actually my second proudly Midwest made print. There was a bigger one that I made a couple years ago that went very well as well. I make a lot of my work has found an audience with other designers. So I tend to make things that other designers would like. And this is one of them. This is part of a series of typography collages or type collages that I've made. I think this is the fourth one in this series. Everyone's a little bit different, trying different combinations. On this one, I focused on the background on serif fonts. And on the front, I did this just counting 1 through 10. And then I had a couple circular ornaments from Donald Tirallo he designed that I threw in there. And they're just, for people that appreciate fonts and type and that kind of thing. I make these calendars. I've been doing this for a few years. These are my mindfulness calendars. So not a great way to keep track of your schedule day to day, but I wanted something different and something that was interactive and a design that changed over time and more thinking about your year overall. And so the calendars come with a set of stickers. And then as each month starts, you put a new sticker on there. And it's kind of a way to think about, how am I using my 30 days? What am I doing next? And I know, especially last year, for whatever reason, it really kind of transformed the way that I made things. I was really much more focused, much more kind of aware of how time was passing and what was I doing with those 4 or 5 weeks. And I've loved it. I've heard other people, really enjoyed them as well. So I said I make a lot of things for designers. That also includes other artists and art educators. So this is a Create Without Fear series that I've been working on for about 3 years. This was year 2, and this is the one that happened last year. And I'll do actually a little process stuff on this so you guys can see what that's like. And you've probably heard this phrase, you can only have 2, good, quick, or cheap. It can be good and quick, but it won't be cheap. It can be quick and cheap, but it won't be good. And then, the other combination. I think it's a good reminder as we're working with clients or as we're working with customers, but also for ourselves. I think we need to have realistic expectations for ourselves as designers, and just be aware that there's constraints on every project. Everybody's working under the circumstances, and so I made this as an encouragement for us as well. And hopefully this doesn't rub anybody the wrong way, but I have some real concerns about AI in the design industry. So I made this as kind of a badge of honor for all of us. It's made AI free, human made with love. And this is another encouragement set. I love the idea of failing forward, that you can only learn, you can only make progress if you move forward. And this is a set that I'll have on Saturday at the Indie Design Market. I'm going to mark them down quite a bit for y'all. And this is another Americana phrase known as the 4 threads of New England character. And I think it was great then. It was developed, said by Calvin Coolidge, and then used for the war effort as a way to kind of conserve resources and make the most of what we had for those efforts. And I think it was relevant then. I think it's relevant now, especially we use it in my house a lot. A lot of people have kind of enjoyed it. My kids know this phrase. We say use it up, and they say wear it out, and I love it. It's a good mentality, good stewardship, I think. And I also do other encouraging things. I'm always usually have a hymns series going. I have great memories of some of these encouraging songs, and others do as well. I like to encourage people to do their democratic process, to take part in this. This was actually one of my earlier prints. I designed it digitally, and then a buddy laser engraved it for me. And I made 2 versions. This is kind of the classic version, and this is my modern one, which I really like. Because one, it's more exciting for me visually. I like the overlapping forms, I like the transparent ink, but I also like it's the same block. So I just printed them 2 different ways with transparent ink, and I love that in the middle you kind of get this overlapping purple color, which I don't know. I like the idea of coming together, of working together, and making things happen. And I usually do holiday prints. This is a give thanks, kind of a big one. And then the smaller one is just a 6x8. And a Valentine's multi-pack I did a couple of years ago. The idea you could buy 5 of these prints. You could split them up, but you could also give it to somebody as kind of like a rotating piece of art throughout the year as a reminder of your love. And this is this year's Valentine's print. Doing something a little bit different. And an Easter print with some custom stuff. And then I love doing Christmas. I love all the imagery. I love the colors, love the messages. So this is a diptych I did a couple years ago. And, on the right there, you can see I love what happens with letterpress and any physical media. When you have those overlapping elements, you get not a change in depth here, but you get a luster shift that I love, kind of shimmers at the angles and the light. And, I think it's something special. It's like putting a spot gloss on something, but traditional. And then I also do a little bit of some custom work, some custom edition things. And that comes in two flavors. One is custom printing wood type and elements that are then digitally scanned and then made into layered files that people can use for whatever. This was made for my local state park, Obachi. They're not too far from here. I love going up there with the kids, and I like running on the trails when I can and just spending time outdoors. So I did this for them, and the block was hand engraved or laser engraved, hand designed. And then because they got separated layers, then they make all this kind of merch out of it. And so stickers and buttons, and I think there's going to be some other things. And then they've done a number of colorways for different apparel through the years. Things are going through, which I think is great. Good way to kind of celebrate the local area and use my skills. And this is a custom edition I did for a friend last year who was putting together a book of large format Polaroid photography. Kind of 8x10 stuff. I don't know if you knew, you can buy Polaroid film at this big size. And he did a book featuring local makers in his area, kind of small business people. And he wanted to give them a gift, everybody that participated. So we worked together to make this dream big, work small, which is kind of his catchphrase that he works with. And this was done for actually my church this last year. And this one was another one where it's printed in two separate layers. So a red layer and then a blue layer. And then they were scanned separately as well as the paper texture. And then they could do motion elements and digital things with it. It was really fun to see happen. And this is for a local guy who does a company called Old Fort Baseball Company. And he celebrates vintage baseball ephemera and traditions. And he wanted a print to sell. So we created this custom design, again, using a laser etched piece there. And he sells these to his customers then, which is fun. And I've started dabbling a little bit with how do I use my own prints to make other things, because obviously I'm making prints that people can then use digitally on their products. And this was something I experimented with in like November of last year. So it's a set of 3 notepads, which I know isn't exciting, but it uses original scans from my sold out Create Without Fear series. And then to make it like a cool bundle, I made these mini prints that are 3x8 inches that slid into every pack, and those go out as well. And everything I do is in limited editions. So there's only 48 of these packs, which were created, and I'll have some at the market on Saturday. And I like that people get something special and very, very limited with what they're doing. All right, so let's chat about the process. Now you kind of see what it is I'm making. Let's talk about all this. So there's my space. It's not very big. It's 10 by 12 feet. So it works really, really well for my purposes. Sometimes I have I've had some homeschooling groups in and such, and I did a couple print nights and things, and people could come out and see it. Doesn't hold a lot of people, but it's good for me and what I make. And I also have another office, which I use for like packing and kind of admin and more of the digital design side of things. And this is the archives here, the treasure. This is my type cabinet. So this was a gift to me by some local friends who used to run a printing business, and they'd had this sitting in their garage for a really long time. And it's just loaded with type, not type from them, stuff I've acquired over the last 3 or 4 years. But I've got almost every drawer packed as full as I can with this stuff. And a rough estimate is I think I'm coming up on around 3,000 blocks of wood type. And the reality is, almost all of this is antique stuff. I hardly have anything that was newly cut. But the reality is almost every one of these fonts is incomplete, because a lot of this stuff has gotten damaged over time, or pieces have gotten lost, or it's been split up. You'll see this happening on eBay and Etsy a lot. People will take a font and then they'll sell the individual characters for things. And so, it's rare to find a really full font with all your characters in the right distribution. So you kind of work with what you've got, and there's a lot of compromise and working in other circumstances that happens here. So when I don't have a character that I need, which happens fairly often, I have a couple options of things that I can do. The first is I can carve things out of linoleum. And actually, I've got a picture here. This was my grandfather's speedball cutter. So I like being able to use that to make things. And I'll make, this is an ampersand I made, but I'll make characters, I'll make custom things to print with. I just finished a print earlier this week, and I don't know if you can see this. This is the checkered pattern. These are all hand carved out of linoleum and then mounted to a little bit of MDF right there, because everything has to be type high, which is 0.918 inches high, and everything has to be at that height. That's the set height for type, and all your other printing elements need to be the same. If it's off a little bit or this way or that, it's either going to dent the paper or it's not going to print at all. Even like a fraction of an inch difference means an area may not print. So I'll show you how we deal with that. And so here is an X that I was missing for a series that I needed. I had one, but I didn't have the other. So there's a couple options. You can stamp it and then trace that and then make a new carving. Or in some circumstances, I'll go online and I'll find historic specimens that match the type that I'm working with, which can be a little difficult because if you didn't know, a lot of these different type manufacturers were kind of ripping each other off at the time. Part of that is, as far as I understand, there's not tight copyright restrictions on the design of the actual letters. Now there is on like font files, but for the actual design of the characters, I don't think that there is. So there was a lot of these companies that would basically take the catalog from another company or buy a sample maybe, and then trace it and make their own version. And it could either be like really, really identical, or they can make little variations or just, slightly derivative of it and that kind of thing. So it's hard to find stuff that matches exactly. And this is an example where I didn't get it exactly right. I used a specimen, and you can see the carved X is just slightly heavier than the original. But that's part of the fun. That's part of the joy of this. A couple other options I have are, there are some contemporary people, some contemporary shops that are carving things. So this is a group out of New York, a little company called Virgin Wood Type, and they make new wood type with routers. And so they have a lot of historic specimens from original manufacturing, and they'll put one end of the router on the pattern, and then as they go, it carves both sides. And the nice thing is, you're getting, when they use the historic patterns, you're getting new versions of historic stuff. So it really, really matches kind of the period of letterpress, which I like. And they're making new fonts now and that kind of thing. They just had a new font like a week or so ago that they rolled out that I believe is designed by a guy that works there named James, which is pretty cool. They're making new stuff. But if those aren't options for me, it's expensive to buy stuff from other people making it. I did get a very generous grant a couple of years ago from the Indiana Arts Commission, and part of that was used to buy a laser engraver. And so that's how I make some things. So this is my Obachi block that I made, and you can see it's engraved. I just burned it on like 1/4 inch plywood, and then I used double-sided carpenter tape or carpentry tape to put on a little piece of MDF or composite board, that kind of thing. And usually that gets it really, really close to printing height. Sometimes on the back, you can glue a piece of paper or something. And this is especially useful when I'm doing tiny stuff. So this is the lettering for State Park, and one that's done in the negative. See that? So I'm printing the sign part, but not the letters. So I can't print that traditionally. So that has to be custom work. But then I put Bluffton, Indiana underneath. And I can't carve little letters like that. And I try to keep all my process using wood type or things that I've carved from linoleum. I don't deal with any metal type whatsoever. I don't do polymer plates. But this is about as close as I get to what a polymer plate process would be. But this is fairly rare. It takes time to carve those, and a certain level of commitment, because once you burn it, that's what you're kind of set with. So just like a lot of y'all, anytime I start a project, there's always a research phase where I'm kind of looking at what other visual people have done with things. How have they tackled this problem? This is for my vote poster, and seeing what the trends are historically. I also look at contemporary designers. I also look at other letterpress designers as well. But I do want to stay fairly rooted in history a lot of times. And so I'm kind of looking at what's been happening from like the middle of the century back. I mean, letterpress was being used up through the 90s, up until basically the Macintosh came along. But still, I kind of focus mid-century and backwards. Now, hopefully I don't get kicked out of the chat for this, but I don't use the Adobe software anymore. I used to, but there was a lot of cost saving measures that occurred in 2020. And one of those was me switching to the Affinity Suite, which I absolutely love. It took me a little while to switch over to this, but I'll tell you what, it's strong software. It's not 100% compatible with the Adobe files, but it is good stuff. And you can assign keyboard shortcuts, so it works like Illustrator and Photoshop for yourself. And I think it's really good stuff. It's like $50 per app, one time for the life of that version, which is pretty good stuff. I see I got a clap. It must be someone else here that uses it. So what I do, sometimes I will design on the press, which means I will just get type and I will organize it on a piece of paper or within a chase, which is the frame you lock up type into, or on the press itself. That happens sometimes. A lot of times, though, I want more control. I want a better idea of where I'm going. And so I'll do digital mock-ups, like a lot of you guys, in digital format. So I use Affinity Designer for this, and I just piece of paper the right size. And I've done a fairly good job of finding fonts that match what's in my type cabinet. And then I'll measure it out to make sure that it's the same height as what I've actually got on hand. And then I will use that with lots of different placements and the different ornaments that I have and do all these different iterations. Obviously, it's way cheaper and way faster for me to work like this than it is to make something do a proof. It doesn't work. You got to clean up the press. You got to rearrange it. And this also allows me to send stuff back and forth to other people, like my wife, or I have a buddy from college I'm still in contact with, and I send him stuff all the time. I'm like, what do you think about these colors? What do you think about this type contrast? And he lets me know what's up. So it's really, really nice. But once I land on a direction, the left is kind of a mock-up. It's a two versions. So I had the first version of Create Without Fear was just the type. I knew I was going to use most of that type again. So I took a photo of that and overlaid the digital lightning bolt to see how that transparency was going to work. Liked it. And then I carved the lightning bolt. Those are all printed once. You choose your paper along the way. Every time you print on different papers or different surfaces, it requires a little bit of fiddling with the pressure of the press, especially the one I just finished had a lot of unique height to it and required a lot of extra kind of finessing to make it work. And then you print your second layer, and then you've got a print. Now, my process is a little bit different when I'm working with people. So for the Abachi project, for instance, I just go through my type cabinet. I figure out what fonts I think are going to be best for this project, for like what they're talking about, what I'm talking about. And then I do some easy mock-ups like this using the actual type. Now I flip it backwards for them so they can read the letters. And then you can see there, I add like half a sentence trying to summarize what the emotional appeal or what the direction is of that font. Other people may not be dealing with fonts all the time, so they're not necessarily thinking about what era it's from. And so I think this goes a long ways towards extending a hand to help during their decision-making process. And it gives you something to hold on to as well. And so just little things like more campy, strong and authoritative, those go a long ways in kind of helping them understand what the gist of the font might be, or the typeface. And then I move into mock-ups. One of the things that I hold pretty dear is that when I work with people, I want it to be something that's made in my style, not necessarily making something in someone else's style. And so when I work with people, I want it to look like it came from my artistic vision, from my studio. It fits with my body of work. And so the compromise looks a little bit different in those situations, but I still go back and forth with options with people and proofs and that kind of thing. Once it's all decided, this is an example of the chase. The chase is that frame that goes around the outside, and everything, all the elements, everything that prints, the type, ornaments, decorative things, all gets locked into the middle. And those coins are tightening tools where you put a little wrench in there and you twist it, and it increases the pressure. And that keeps everything in place through multiple runs on the press. So everything looks the same. So your registration stays the same and all that. And obviously working in a grid is usually what I'm doing. That's the easiest. The wood blocks are cut into squares, so here's a 2, you can see it's a square. Here's a 5, it's a square. And even when it doesn't touch the side, right, that's not carved out most of the time. And so you're just butting rectangles up against themselves. So it's really easy to put things in rectangles. And even on my proof press, there's a rectangular grid engraved on the steel, which is really nice. And then sometimes I'll lay them out like this in what's called a galley tray. A galley tray is as close as I have to saving a file. So you put the type in here and you lock it all into place. You make it really tight. And then you can move that on and off the press and have other things that you're printing. And you can save it for later if you think you're going to run a design again, or you're going to run a second color or whatever. But a lot of times I'm just doing it on the press. I may use a piece of paper underneath that's cut to the right size and put all the type there. And I just lift it and put it on the press, or design on the press occasionally. One part that usually has to happen is something called make ready. And so when the type is on the press, you may discover that not everything is perfectly type height. And so, for instance, things may become shorter over time from pressure. They may not have been planed correctly. They may have been damaged, or maybe something was made from scratch, or there's a laminate type that's been included in your batch. All these things lead to different heights. And so what you do is you use, if you look on the right-hand side, that's what's underneath the type for that calendar for this last year. It took all those little pieces of paper, torn into little different kind of shims to get the type to be perfectly level so it would print correctly. And bigger type is harder to work with. It's got a larger surface. There's more that can go wrong, but this happens fairly often with type, little pieces of torn paper underneath things. And unlike digital design, kerning is a little more difficult. So I just can't select the letters and then hold down Alt and then left and right and make things closer. I have to actually go in and alter the type. So here I have to cut out a space in the L and a space in the Y, and then fit those together so I get the right optical spacing. And here's another example of an LY kern I had to do. And you can see in that picture, I just kind of squeeze some pieces of wood and a piece of mat board in there to get the right tension so everything holds still. And this is the one I just finished. This was really very difficult to do because I was dealing with handmade elements, and I was dealing with type that was italicized, so that Indy is italicized, and then I wanted it on a stair step. And so I've got little pieces of everything wedged in there trying to make this thing work. So I'm not only dealing with like the X and Y, but the Z of everything. It was quite the thing. I've got an actual piece of chipboard underneath that type that's cut to that zigzag shape just to get that part leveling up, because I need access to the steel plate for the magnets to hold things in place. It was a real nightmare, but it's a beautiful print. I'm really happy with it. And then there's proofs usually. These are dry proofs done with graphite transfer paper. This is for a Merry Christmas series last year. And I just print it, and then I go through and I mark all the issues that I see. And I go back to the lockup and adjust it. Here at the top, you can see that really black heavy mark. That was me taking another piece of type and stamping it, like using the ink pad and stamping it to see if that might be where I wanted it to go. Kind of a work in progress. And I ended up altering it. I cut out that circle to make an ornament, and that's how it ended up printing. But this is a good place to mess around. And then all my inks are hand inked. So I have a small batch. You can see them back there of my inks. And Cranfield Caligo Safe Wash is what I use because you don't have to use harsh solvents with it, which is really good. I don't have to worry about cleanup as much or my kids being around. But it's a very limited palette of colors. And so you end up mixing a lot of stuff on your own. And then you print one color, you print two color, and every once in a while I'll do colorways of things. So the gift thanks on the left was on a cheaper paper, but with two colors. The one on the right was on a more expensive paper, but one color, kind of a more refined one. And that gives people options for what they want to enjoy in their space, what goes with their aesthetic. And, I love them both just for different reasons. I wouldn't make things if I wasn't excited about how they look. And I'm not just making things for variety. Now, sometimes when there's two colors, I don't have to do separate passes. I can do them at the same time. I just have to use really, really small rollers, and it has to be inked and printed by hand. So this is for that Let Heaven and Nature Sing print. The star was in this yellow ochre color, and all the type was in red. So those are inked at the same time, but they're manually printed. So all my bigger prints are manually printed anyhow. It just takes longer to do this kind of thing. But I'm touching these prints multiple times in their lifespan in my studio, and part of that is touch ups. So for this one, I had some issues with some red spreading onto those star tips, and I'll just go in with a paintbrush, a really nice paintbrush, and I'll grab a little of that ink while it's still wet, and I can dab. Or I've done this kind of thing before. If I have an area of color for whatever reason, this corner of the lightning bolt was not printing well. So I use a clean brayer and I ink the same color just right on top of it, made a little mask. So I do this kind of little hand tipping thing along the way. And then once they're printed, I hang them to dry in my studio. Usually that's a fairly fast process. It is slower in the winter. And then if there's any trimming that needs to be done, a lot of times my paper is printed at a plus size, and then it's trimmed down to the final size, just like regular print projects. This one had a custom deckled edge at the bottom, and not every sheet had that when it came. So I had to go through and hand decal probably about 5/8 or 3/4 maybe of the edition. I had to make a new custom deckled edge for, which is fine. It's just part of the process, just another step. And then everything's photographed, and I make kind of the marketing images. I do some digital mock-ups like this one on the right. Some of them I make myself. Some I use an app for to show people how they might look in different spaces. And then if it all goes well, you guys order them. And if the weather's nice enough, I load them onto my bicycle and I bike down to my post office, which closes at 9:30 in the morning, which gives me a really good incentive to get up and rock it and not waste any time. But it's a great way to start the day. Fresh air, get to see some people, and I love taking that little trip down there. Sometimes the kids will load up orders with me if it's a Saturday or the summer or whatever, which is fun. And my latest project was refurbishing this 1916 press. I got it on Marketplace. It was an absolute mess, but this is what it looks like now. It's foot pedal driven, and that's what this Indiana print was made on, and the type for Midwest Made was made on. And I use that for the 6x8s and 8x10s largely. Everything above that is usually made with the proof press. All right. Well, that was, man, that went fast. Hope I didn't talk too fast. Thanks for having me. That was fun. Please follow along on Etsy and Facebook and Instagram and Threads because followers are always good. I post all my new prints there, and I do behind the scenes stuff, especially on Instagram. And then as a thank you for everybody that came today, I made a little coupon just for my Etsy shop from today through Sunday. You can get 15% off for 24 indie off anything with this code 24 indie design, but that's only in the Etsy shop. You'll still pay shipping and tax. And as a reminder, I'll be at the market on Saturday where I'll have some special deals as well, but no shipping because you'll get to come see me and you'll get to see the prints in person, which is fun. All right. That's my whole thing. Do you guys have any questions?
Awesome. While they're thinking about questions, Daniel, I just want to say thank you. That was an awesome presentation. It's so cool to see your process.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. All right. We do have one. It was submitted in the question forum, but it just says, so impressive, Daniel. Thanks so much for sharing.
Hey, you're welcome.
Oh, yeah. Sounds like everyone liked it.
Happy to share.
Oh, here we go. How do you handle telling clients no if the style doesn't fit your studio style? That's a good question.
That's handled right up front. There's kind of an initial contract, and the front page is just like a very simple summary of what we're going to do. And one of those bullet points is this is a contract to commission a project for you in my style, and either one of us can end the project at any time. So I'm pretty clear with them about that in the conversation, but this is what I want to do. But this is not a fast craft, and it doesn't work like digital design. If we go in a direction and they change their mind or I change their mind, that can take a serious amount of time to fix. So I want to make sure that we're all kind of on the same page. But I think that's why people want to work with me. I think they want this look. So
yeah, that's awesome. We have one more came in. Amazing work. I love the incorporation of old and new. So much of the messaging was relevant then and just as relevant now. How and where have you learned how to do all of this?
Sure. So I mean, I will give a giant shout out to the letterpress community. There are not a ton of people doing this thing. There's a lot of shops, but it's in the hundreds, not thousands, like there are designers. And so there's a very supportive community on social media. There's a couple of Facebook groups. There's a site called briarpress.org, if I remember right, that has all kinds of forums where people have asked questions for, I don't know, a decade, and other people have answered them with their expertise. And that's old school printers and designers, and that's the new generations that are working as well. Everybody is really, really giving and helpful, because this equipment and these materials, they are not going to be around. They're getting thrown away. They're getting scrapped. I mean, even the chases, which is the frame that fit on my foot pedal press, you just can't pick those up, and nobody's fabricating those things. So I put a message out in one of the boards, and the one person didn't have it, another person didn't have it, but one guy found it in his collection in California. He had two of them, and so you pay a premium for that, but it's the equipment that goes with what I have, and that makes it valuable and work again. And so everybody's kind of trying to keep the craft alive together.
Awesome. That's yeah,
Yeah,
that's super cool. There's a community to rely on.
absolutely.
All right, we've got a couple more coming in. Will you mock up your vision before sharing the direction with the client or sketch? How do you share what you're thinking?
So there was the slide where I showed there was like 6, I think, examples of different type for Obachi. That was all I showed them. These are the options. This is the type that I have. And that's what they got to kind of kick off the project. And then I did the next screen of some color iterations and some design iterations, so that they can see what it might look like, especially when they were going to get a layered file, helping them envision what it might look like with different colors behind it, with black as the type every time. So yeah, I share some digital stuff, but I don't do a lot of client stuff. But I have in the past. So digital is a nice, simple way to say these are some options. We can nudge things around, and it doesn't cost me a lot to go in and fix things at that level. It's once we get to wood type, once we get to custom elements, that's where we kind of want to lock everything down.
Nice, yeah. And hopefully, like, you being upfront about, like, this is the style you're commissioning me for this, hopefully that kind of helps direct it
Yeah.
from the beginning.
Yep.
All right. Got another one. Can you share more about your work experience before switching to letterpress studio work and how that previous experience impacts your work now, if it does at all?
Yeah. So I was an illustrator starting in about 2003 through to roughly 2020. And during that time, I also did some graphic design, but I was largely an illustrator. And I did a lot of mid-century work, a lot of family and children type illustration, that kind of thing. I was also a professor for 9 years, something like that. And that was what I got laid off from. So I had a lot of experience teaching graphic design, and that's what got me interested in letterpress, because that's part of the history of graphic design. And it was something that I kind of had my eye on and I wanted to do. But I was busy illustrating, I was busy, teaching and that kind of thing. And at 2020 was a threshold moment. It was a time to reevaluate everything. And I was just really feeling at that point where I was not going to be able to make it as an illustrator. It was very, very hard to bring in the work regularly enough for me to be happy to stay working. And it ended up just kind of being one of those things where, like, I've dumped decades into this thing, and I just don't feel like I'm just always treading water. I need to try something different. And so everything else changed in 2020. So I decided to try this, and it really started very hobby like, because I still had some graphic design freelance coming in 2020. But in 2021, I started taking it a little more seriously. And in 2022, I kind of really, really got rocking on it. And that's when things started coming together, and the prints and my style kind of came together, and spread started happening on social media. And but all that built into it. I mean, I have a degree in fine art painting, and that's how I learned how to mix paints. And that's what I use to mix these inks. It's the same color theory. It's the same thing. All that mid-century time that I spent in illustration, that rolls into this stuff. It's just typographic now. So it all is impacted in it. And I don't think that any of it was a waste of time. I think that with age and certain life experiences, you just come to a point where you need to make a choice. and you take what you've learned and you move forward with it, and use all the tools in your tool belt to make whatever's next.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. That ties right into our theme this week, actually, with divergent. And yeah,
It's a big one.
that's awesome. The color theory I was going to ask too, so I'm glad that you covered that. I was going to
Yeah.
ask if you mixed before. All right, we've got a couple more coming in. I want to be conscientious of your time, so as long as you're good for a couple more questions.
Yeah, I'm fine.
Okay, great. What is a dream project you've always wanted to apply your skills to?
Oh, well, I loved doing the Obachi project. I think it would just be fantastic to do a different design for every park in the state. But there was a group a couple years ago called Type Hike, which did new national park posters. And they did kind of a traveling exhibit of them. They're no longer in existence, but you can still find the posters online. They're very cool. I think doing a national park series would be a lot of fun. A great way to contribute and encourage people to be outdoors, be in nature and creation. It's great to get fresh air and be out in the real world and away from the glass screens all the time. So I would love to do something like that. I think that'd be pretty great. And I've got some other projects. I mean, I've got a laundry list of projects that are coming along, but I think a national park or all the state parks would be pretty cool to do.
Awesome. Yeah, that sounds great. All right, we've got, do you have any tips on how to develop your own style?
Um, you know, I think it's one of those things you need to be intentional about, but at the same time, let it happen as it happens. I think over controlling it can be an issue when you're trying to make a style, when you're still growing and maturing and kind of becoming whatever that next creator is. But I think some of it is, maybe nobody likes talking about formalism too much, about contrasts of line and shape and form and space and repetition and variation, all those kinds of things. But all those little building bricks there, that's what make up your style, right? It's the way that you're using space. It's the way you're using color. It's the way that you're using negative forms and curvilinear versus rectilinear and all that kind of jazz. So I think being really analytical about what you're doing is really useful. And another thing I found useful is if you can find time, I tend to do this in January, to step back and look at what you did in the last year, think about where you're going in the next year, and then also look at everything you've made and then drop all the pieces that you don't think are your style anymore. Like, not, you can still have them up for sale or still use them in your portfolio or whatever, but like, these are the 5, this is the direction I want to go. And I may have made one in March and another in June and July and August, and they're all separated. They're for different clients, so they're different projects. They're like, man, this is the sweet spot. If I could do something, this is what I would want to do for the next year, and kind of use that as your centering point for your planning in January. Now that's when you're doing much more self-driven work, obviously, like what I'm doing. It's difficult when all your work comes from clients. They need to see ahead of time in your portfolio what it is you're going to make. So there's an argument there for editing your portfolio to just have the stuff that you want to make. And that's not new. That's not a new proposal by any means. I've heard that plenty of times. But it's a careful balance, because some work is what gets you work and some work is where you want to go with your work. So be intentional and eliminate the things that you don't want to do, I guess.
That's great portfolio advice. How do you come up with new ideas in a medium that can be pretty rigid?
That's a great question. Well, I think part of it is that I really love type. I love fonts and I love that design. So there's already like some joy and some spark in just playing with typographic contrast. As nerdy as that sounds, I really get into it. The other thing is working with messaging, because when I select something to make, it's usually something that I need to hear, but also something I want other people to hear. And I think those two come together in a lot of ways, to find ideas that I'm excited about. And then it's just finding what is the best possible way to do it with what I have. Does that make sense? So like, man, I got this font and I think it is perfect for this concept. How do I make it work? If I only have, if if I have a limited budget, I don't want to spend more than $50 on this project. What am I going to carve? What am I going to make? What am I going to engrave? What am I going to buy online? What kind of paper am I going to spend? Or whatever. If it's a larger edition, you've got a bigger budget. Oh man, can I go crazy and get a whole tray of type for this one? I don't know if that's necessarily the question, but I mean, that's what keeps me going. That's how I find new ideas, is the joy of type and messages that I think are important for us as creatives and the rest of the world. And then, making it work, which we're all doing, right? Everybody's got budgets. Every client you work for, there's only so many hours you may have, or licensing rights, or, money for fonts or whatever. So I think we're all working under compromises to some degree. So I just try to find the intersection of those three things, I guess. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I think most of us designers probably can relate to that, right? Trying to balance it all.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, there are no other questions in there. I just want to say thank you again,
Okay.
Daniel, for that insightful
Yeah.
talk, and remind everyone here that, you can find Hoosier Type Company at the market on Saturday. That is free for everyone, the whole public. So feel free, bring your friends,
Yes.
your family. It's all ages. Bring the kids. Come hang out at the Studs. Grab some prints. I own one of Daniel's prints. It's in my office actually at home. So yeah, definitely come check it out. Follow Hoosier Type Company on social platforms, on Etsy, and yeah, support your local
Yep.
letterpress designers.
And don't forget that code if you want to get yourself something.
Yeah,
Can't make it to the market, plug that in for 50% off. So
great. Well, thank you again, Daniel.
yeah, thanks so much, guys. See you
Thank you
later.
everyone for coming.